In the current circumstances of the lockdown, which still continues and will continue, I'm sure, for a while in some shape or form, we are all attending a lot of virtual meetings and a lot of virtual events. And these are an amazing resource that are helping us to continue working and learning and to keep us motivated and engaged. So I would like to talk to you about two types of learning that realizing that they coexist and they're equally important will help you maximize the benefits of virtual learning via meetings or webinars or any other formats. So the two types are cognitive and socio-emotional learning. The difference between them is that cognitive learning is to do with acquiring and processing information. That's something that can be done actually by reading a book or listening to a podcast or watching a YouTube video, but there is an element that will be missing there. And this is exactly what live training, training facilitated by a trainer, introduces and contributes to the process of learning, that socio-emotional aspect. So what does this aspect mean? As with cognitive learning, we look at the information and skills and how we process and learn those. With socio-emotional learning, we actually learn about what we and others think and feel in the process. And we are also learning how to manage those thoughts and emotions. So this type of learning requires us to focus on our own and other people's experiences and managing the thinking process. You might be, for example, educating someone who doesn't need it if you don't pay attention to who your audience is. So paying attention to who your audience is, who you're speaking to, and what language you are using is that socio-emotional side of learning. And because we are at the moment adapting to these new circumstances, it's important to understand the value of socio-emotional learning in making the process of learning more effective when it's based online. So you might want to add certain elements to your lectures or to your webinars where you actually interact with people and ask them questions that make them reflect and discover things for themselves. And those things, when they connect to them emotionally, make them remember the content of that learning much better. And they also make people bond with one another, develop an emotional connection. So for example, if you start a meeting by asking people how they've been finding the situation or how they found this week so far, but they know the expectation is actually spending some time talking authentically rather than asking just out of politeness how they are, that is a completely different experience when they know that it's a genuine question where you are inquiring about their well-being. You might want to go for some slightly perhaps unusual activities that normally don't happen in meetings or sessions, such as collective meditation for 5 minutes, or practicing mindfulness, or sharing successes, in fact challenges as well, and giving people opportunity to actually help one another and support one another within these circumstances will certainly support the process of learning. So every time you introduce this element to meetings and webinars, people commit to one another, and they commit to wanting to collaborate and support one another. And those who have experimented with these methods say that afterwards, when introducing a survey, which is so easy in those virtual meetings with virtual tools, those participants actually found those moments very meaningful, and they were the ones that they remembered very well. But when we meet face to face, it's slightly easier to develop that connection through different social cues that are to do with the physical connection, and it is about certain gestures, and it's easier to keep eye contact, etc. Whereas online, we just need to find different ways of connecting emotionally and developing that bond with the other person. And these are those socio-emotional skills when you can recognize this need in people and facilitate the process. You could ask people to read a book, you could ask people to, watch videos, and there are courses online these days on anything you want. But there is still value in having the learning process facilitated and having someone there who can create that human connection. So being able to combine these two types of learning makes us both competent and human. Also, without this socio-emotional side of learning, learning can become very dry and very confusing, and that introduces elements of fear into the process. And fear is obviously an emotion that can erode cognitive learning and send us into a mental lockdown. And it's very easy to rely too much on the cognitive side of learning, especially while learning virtually. A good example of not appreciating the socio-emotional side of learning is when, for example, people get promoted within the role to a managerial role because of their expertise in the subject. However, they've not been trained and they've not been coached on how to lead and how to influence people. And that ability to focus on people is something extremely important in leadership and also self-leadership. So in these unprecedented times, I would like to encourage you to focus more on the socio-emotional side of learning and approach the process of learning more holistically. After all, this is how we transform ourselves and our businesses, with those socio-emotional skills on top of the cognitive learning.